Whether we like it or not, it's always been true that a public man's private sex life makes him vulnerable. Hoover knew this. He would eventually seek out one of the most distinguished psychiatrists in Washington to ask for advice and help because he was so terrorized by his own sexuality. What was he, as director of the FBI, to do about these urges that he had?
In Washington, D.C., police detectives were picking up intelligence about Hoover's private life.
Guy Hoddle was a retired or fired agent. He was an alcoholic. And Hoddle would, every time he had a few drinks, he would tell stories about parties that went on in J. Edgar Hoover's house when there were sex parties there. No girls. So when you say sex parties, what does that mean if you have no girls?
Joe Scheiman also heard that years earlier in New Orleans, Hoover had been picked up by the Vice Squad.
See, New Orleans is a wide open town. There are prostitutes who work there, and of course, you know and I know that if you have a dozen prostitutes on this work on the streets, you'd at least have a half a dozen male prostitutes. He picked up one of the pretty boys, and Vice Squad apparently was watching him and arrested him. Now, I don't know the details of the arrest. I never got it, other than he was arrested and charged. Charged with a sex offense. And the arrest was washed out.
In Las Vegas, Hoover's homosexuality was more than a matter of gossip. In the casinos, the wise guys talked about how it gave the mafia a hold over him.
Irving Resnick, who was the Las Vegas representative of the big New England mob family, said in 1971 that Lansky was the one who had, quote, nailed J. Edgar Hoover.
I remember Ash Resnick at the Caesar's Palace. He used to be the manager of the nightclub there. He told me that Meyer Lansky had some pretty strong evidence that Hoover and Tolson were both homosexuals.
When he was asked what that meant, he said that Lansky had obtained photographs of Hoover in a compromising situation with Clyde Tolson.
One man who actually claims to have seen such photographs is Gordon Novell, a controversial figure with connections to the intelligence community. Novell, who had worked for the White House in the early 1960s, became involved in a complicated legal action which the White House wanted him to pursue, but which Hoover wanted dropped.
So I went to the White House, and the White House sent me to Mr. Angleton, Director of Counterintelligence, CIA. We met in a restaurant, and I told him my problem, and he says, I know what your problem is. He said, you need to tell Mr. Hoover that you've met with me and that you're not going to dismiss the lawsuit and that you've seen this. At which point he opened up his briefcase and pulled out a couple of photographs of Mr. Hoover in flagrante delicto, I guess is one way to describe it. Having oral sex.
This testimony does not stand alone. I talked to a former regular officer in the OSS, that's the predecessor of the CIA, who said that after the war, he went to dinner with other OSS American intelligence colleagues, and that after dinner, when over the brandy stage, when conversation turned to the private lives of public people, his host went out of the room and then came back with a photograph. And this was passed around the table, and the photograph showed two men, Hoover and Tolson, engaged in homosexual activity.
In New Orleans, where the CIA and the Mafia had sometimes collaborated, Mafia Don Carlos Marcello told Gordon Novell that he, too, had seen a photograph.
I had volunteered the information that I had seen a picture of Mr. Hoover in performing oral sex, and he said that he had seen it, too, and that had been used to keep the FBI, but not the Justice Department, off the back of the mob.
There was another way in which the Mafia could have learned of Hoover's homosexuality. In the late 1950s, Hoover was a regular visitor at the home of Meyer Lansky's friend, the former bootlegger Louis Rosenstiel, and his wife Susan.
I found out early in the marriage that my husband was bisexual. He was involved with Roy Cohn, the assistant counsel to Senator McCarthy. When he used to come with a little boyfriend, and they used to, like, squeeze each other, and that I should really see that he was a gay boy. So one day, Rosenstiel said, we're going to go this evening to the Plaza Hotel. And Roy Cohn was there. And he said, you'll be very much surprised at what you'll see. Oh, I didn't have much to say. I said, all right, I'll go.
When they arrived at the plaza, Rosenstiel insisted that they enter by a side door.
We went up into the elevator. We went to either the second or the third floor. There was a sign on the door where he led me to, not to disturb. And we knocked on the door, and Roy Cohn opened the door. And we went in, and there was this gentleman. He was dressed as a woman, and Roy introduced me. He said, I'd like you to meet Mary. Well, I knew the name wasn't Mary because he looked just like J. Edgar Hoover. In fact, he was very solid looking, and he had like a little growth, and he was dressed in a black chiffon dress, very short with ruffles, and a black lace stockings, and high heel shoes, and a black curly wig, and black false eyelashes. And he was sitting, he crossed his legs.
Now, wait a minute. You're saying it looked like J. Edgar Hoover, or it was clearly to you J. Edgar Hoover?
It was clearly to me J. Edgar Hoover.
Do you have any doubt at all about that?
Absolutely not.
According to Susan Rosenstiel, two young men arrived, and first Hoover, then Cohn and Rosenstiel went into the bedroom and had sex with them. Once again, Hoover had allowed himself to be dangerously compromised.
I heard Rosenstiel say that if Hoover ever brings pressure against Lansky or any of us, we'll use this as blackmail. We'll expose him.
Meyer Lansky had some pretty heavy stuff on Hoover, that he was a homosexual, without any question. And he'd shove it to him if he ever had to.
Irving Resnick said Lansky was the guy who controlled the pictures, and he had made his deal with Hoover to lay off. That was the reason that for a long time we had nothing to fear from the FBI.